240, Chapter 20 of Dracula. Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from the shores of the Potomac in Virginia, the Old Dominion. Episode 240, In the Country of No Email. This episode of CraftLit is brought to you by Knit Circus, the online magazine featuring 3 rings of knitting, sewing, and fun. You can find out more by visiting www.knitcircus.com. Also, Cool for Cats, the new novel by Andrew C. Ordover. You can get it at amazon.com or find out more from the link in the show notes. And now it's even easier to listen to CraftLit as you go about your merry business. You can listen on the iPhone iTouch app, the Droid app, or you can download the free Stitcher Radio app to get the most recent episodes, not the full complement of all of the episodes. But, for free, that's okay too. Chopbard is also on there along with a lot of other fabulous shows from NPR, and Just the Books is now on Stitcher Radio as well. So if you have someone, a loved one perhaps, who really couldn't care less about the crafty stuff, and you know that they'd like the books, have them listen to Just the Books on Stitcher. Although again, Dracula starts back on 223. They'll have to listen to Just the Books via the website or iTunes in order to get those early episodes. Well, welcome and hello. It has been a good week. I hope your week has gone well as well. And I have all sorts of little goodies for you. Last week with the disaster of the computer and all that implies, many, many things got dropped like a hot rock, as it were. And a couple of those things were announcements. One is Fitter Knitter from Ravelry. She had written me forever ago, like in December, to have me mention the 2012 Calendar of Hope. This is the fourth year that she's done this publication, and she's a survivor as well, and she finds this is a great way to give back with the help of some very talented knitters. Almost 100% of the proceeds go to the armyofwomen.com, which is trying to find out why we get breast cancer. Isn't that interesting? Instead of just saying, wow, let's fix this, actually to go into it and see why it happens. You can read more about her calendar on her website, www.fitterknitter.com. And I know it's January 27th. It's already into 2012. But for something like this, I think getting 11 months out of the year is not so bad. It's going to a good place. So there's a link in the show notes, and you can check that out from craftlit.com. Also, Lisa emailed me to let me know that she found a very strange thing. It's a little news report on the extinct Dracula monkey. Okay, so, also, we have 2 knit-alongs coming up. We have Kathleen, she started in January, but I was a complete dope and didn't announce it. Kathleen, who did the Miss Prynne collar, the cowl that is so gorgeous and beaded if you would like, and not beaded if you would not like. She is extending her knit-along into February. And then Hunter Hammerson of the Cthulhu Waits sock and the Silk Road sock book and the upcoming Knitter's Cabinet book. She is hosting her knit-along also on Ravelry for the Cthulhu sock. And if you have someone in your life who is a crazy science fiction fanatic and they at all love H.P. Lovecraft, please consider doing the Cthulhu knit-along as a present for them. I swear to you, if you've never done hand knit socks for them before, they will fall all over themselves and be so appreciative because the sock is cool. So there it is. There are those announcements, which I really, really, really had to make. The other thing is Tara in Tennessee emailed me, and I just got it this morning. She found this wonderful little article on famous authors and their beautiful estates. And I think the very first one up, let me double check this, was Edith Wharton. And it's gorgeous. Gorgeous. Yeah, Edith Wharton's estate. I wouldn't mind living there on the Mount. She built it in 1902. Anyway, you got to go look at these pictures because they are stunning. And especially on a cold, snowy day, it's kind of nice to see all the fabulousness that is out there in the green world that we will have shortly. Actually, it's not snowy anymore here. It was last week. Now it is rainy. It is about to be not rainy anymore. And it's 50 degrees out. Something is really, truly wrong with the universe that it is 50 degrees out on January 27th. Just saying. Now, way back before I experienced the frenetic energy at Vogue Knitting Live, I was interviewed by Marley at Yarn Thing Podcast. And Marley, holy cow, you probably already listened to her. She has 15,000 listeners. Marley is amazing. She just flat out is amazing. The amount she does. You think I do a lot. You haven't met Marley. Woof. Not only is she amazing because she can do so much, but she's amazing because she's fabulous. I did get to meet her in the Bijou Basin yarn booth. She is fantastic. She's tall, which makes me happy because I'm 5'8". And so, we're bonding on the tall thing. She's gorgeous. She's funny, and she hosts a really great podcast. And before Vogue Knitting, she had Erica, our designer Erica of Jane's Ubiquitous Shawl et al., and me on her podcast. That interview is still alive and living on her feed. Now, she actually hosts a live podcast on Tuesdays, and if you check your time zone, you can call in and ask questions of the people who she has on the line. Very, very cool. She also usually does things like giveaways and stuff like that. So if you are near a computer or phone or some way to listen on Tuesdays, it's noonish Eastern Standard Time, then, you could actually participate in her podcast. I don't know how her poor heart can stand it. The stress of having to do a podcast live would absolutely send me over the edge. I really do need to be able to go back and listen and edit and get stuff right. And Vicky, our fabulous listener, Vicky is cooking along with me. We are getting the back episodes of CraftLit turned over into just the books. That is continuing to happen. Life is good, and we're looking for better audio that is in the public domain that is available for Tale of Two Cities. Because that audio really needs to be fixed. It's such a good book. And I've been feeling bad about that for a long time now. So I'm on a hunt. Now, last week I mentioned that I had had a really great conversation with Sally Holt, and I'm going to play you some audio from that conversation today. Sally is the person, the mastermind behind Knit Companion. If you've never seen this program before, let me explain to you briefly what it does. Knit Companion, which as of now is only available on the iPad, and you'll hear why shortly. And there's a real, very interesting, fascinating reason. For those of you on other tablets, you want to hear this. Knit Companion allows you to import a PDF of a pattern. It then allows you to manipulate that and break it down into its component chunks. So you can have text pieces, chart pieces, and a key. Why would you want to do that, I hear you ask? And the answer is this. Because for those of you who are forever putting highlighter strips or many, many, many Post-it notes on charts to keep your place, or for those of you who, like me, find themselves incapable of putting pencil checks on a page to keep track of rows, Knit Companion allows you to isolate the charts, combine the charts along a vertical or horizontal axis, creating complete charts, the kind that you used to have to photocopy and cut and tape together, 4 or 5 pieces of paper to get a complete chart. Yeah, you can do that all inside Knit Companion. I know, right? It's incredible. And then you have one central screen that you have these little slidey things, so you can pull the key up to look at it. You can pull row counters out to look at them. You can change to looking at the text directions. You can flip back to the chart, and you can move a highlighter, a complete row highlighter, up and down to track where you are in your chart. That means when you stop at night and you close the iPad or turn it off, you open it the next day, you open Knit Companion, and the highlighter is still there waiting for you, telling you what row you're on. And this app was designed by a knitter for knitters, and it really shows. And the thing that was so interesting to me was how much is going on behind the scenes in an app like this.
I suppose making an app is a simple matter of programming. That's something us programmers always like to talk about is, it's just a simple matter of programming. But this app is, exactly. Heather just air quoted my simple matter of programming through the video. This is a tough app to make, and I'm not sure every app developer out there would be up to building an app like this one. It just, it seems like, it's, just doing a little bit of stuff with PDFs, but there's a bunch of math in the background to make all those charts line up. Right. There's a bunch of memory and page flow things that have to be dealt with. There's a lot of stuff going on in the background, and it is probably one of the more complex apps that I've seen so far in the App Store. When we were doing all the work, I have a business partner, and he does all the really hard coding work, and he and I have worked together for years and years. And I'll tell you, when we were in the midst of this, it was about 6 months of just hardcore development, and I had to teach him all about patterns. He's not a knitter, so I had to teach him all about patterns and how that works. We looked at what else was out there with the generic PDF readers, and I'm like, but then I can't stitch charts together, and if my key's on a different page, and if I flip with my finger when I'm moving the marker, I might get my rows messed up. And so, we did all this work, and about partway through it, I was like, God, what if nobody likes this? What if it's not cool? And I finally decided the absolute worst thing that could happen is, both of us would invest a lot of time in this, but I'd come out with a really cool knitting app that I liked. Even if nobody else liked it, it would be perfect for me. And he would come away, knowing how to make really complicated apps for the iPad, and that's a big plus for him as a developer. And so in the end, there really wasn't that big of a downside, and so we rolled the dice. And I cannot tell you how thrilled I am, and both of us are, that people actually, really like Knit Companion and find it valuable. So that's such a kick for me.
I haven't actually gone out to investigate, like, is it up on KnitPicks? Is there, where have you been able to get the information out? So
the way that apps work with Apple is that they are distributed through Apple's App Store. So I cannot I cannot make it available for resale through KnitPicks because it has to go through Apple's App Store. Yeah, but we do some advertising. We've advertised with the Knitty folks, and they've been great. They actually did a review of the product right before Christmas. Okay. And so we've advertised with the Knitty folks. We've advertised in some of the other online magazines like Twist Collective. And then we do a lot of advertising and a lot of work through Ravelry. And really, I think that's the biggest challenge, is sort of getting the word out there that this app exists and that it's really a lot different from pretty much everything else that's out there. I have to say that our users and our fan base who've picked up Knit Companion and learned about it, and then they're sharing it with other folks at their knitting groups and kind of sponsoring it with us, have been our best form of advertising. So we spend a lot of time focusing on customer service, trying to understand what people want, where they want to go with this, make sure that it's going to support the patterns that they use. And to me, that's not only the right thing to do when you release an app and someone's paid, to buy your product, but it's also really, it pays off in spades because our happy customers really are our advertising out there.
It's all so good. And there is a learning curve. It's not, I think so often, especially with Mac products, people kind of figure that they're going to, it's like with Angry Birds. Oh, I drag the bird and let go. Hey, I won. Knit Companion isn't like that. Knit Companion, you have to invest a little time to learn how it works because it does have so many capabilities, and just being able to put the key on the same page and hide it when you don't need it, but have the key there and available for you. And I've never used row counters in my life until, like, I couldn't use those little kachakas. I always forgot. And I know other people, they can do little pencil scratches for every row. I forgot. But your knit counter, because it highlights the row you're on, genius!
Well, and you're right. There is a learning curve. It's funny, when we first released the product in July, the first weekend that it was released was a little crazy because we didn't have the videos out. So Sunday, it released on like Thursday or Friday. And we were all excited, we go to bed and it's going to be in the App Store the next morning, and I get up and there's this bomb of questions. How do I do this? How do I do that? And I'm like, it's all in the online help. And then by Sunday afternoon, I'm like, that's not going to work at all. And so literally Sunday afternoon, all the way through Sunday night and into Monday, all I did was figure out how to record a video and get it up onto YouTube and then make the links available. So there was a little bit of a push for getting those videos out there, but they're the best thing I've ever done. And we did a couple of things when we set up the app. We made it free to download, and it comes with the designer patterns built in, so people can at least experience what it's like with a pattern that's already set up, so they can decide if that's even an interface for them.
Right.
They don't have to make any investment to do that. And then if they think they do like that interface, they can watch all the videos before they have to buy, so they can see exactly what they're getting into before they make that purchase commitment. And I think that's really great too. There's so many apps out there, and yeah, they're probably less expensive than Knit Companion, but you have no idea what you're getting into until you click that purchase button. And it's so easy, $1.99 here, $2.99 there, and then you end up throwing it away because it doesn't do what you want it to do.
Right.
So we did really want to make sure people could understand what the whole thing was about before they had to make that commitment.
Questions about the future. I asked my Stitch and Pitch group, will you ever consider building for something other than the iPad?
So we will consider other platforms besides the iPad. In fact, we have a release coming out in February, which will incorporate the phone as well, the Apple phone.
Oh, I love you so much.
And it'll be fully functional on those devices, so you'll be able to do setup and everything. We're releasing it as a universal app, and what that means is if you've already bought it for one device, you can put it on the other device for no charge. Wow. And we also tweaked the interface for the phone and the touch, because it is a much smaller screen, so that we would take most advantage of the real estate that's available on those devices. So we tried to leave the screen flow and the general usability the same, so you don't have to learn a whole new app. But we did make a few little changes. You can hide extra windows on the main page, and there's a few things that are rearranged and a few extra things to make it easier to use on the phone. And so far, the feedback from folks who've been testing that is that it's actually quite usable on the phone and the touch. So we're pretty excited about that. We will be looking at making it available on the laptop, the PC, and the Mac platform as a computer program. Can't promise a universal app there because right now Apple Store for the Mac Store is not integrated with the device store. So they would really give us no way to do that, but we'll just have to see how that evolves over the next 6 months or so. And then we have been looking, we've got a lot of requests for the Android platform and all the different types of devices in the Android platform. And we've been looking at that a lot. Android, as some of your listeners will know, is provided by Google, but it's provided as what's called shareware. So Google actually provides the device manufacturers the source code for the operating system, and then the people who manufacture the devices can alter that operating system because they have the source code. They can remove libraries, they can add libraries, they can change how things work, and that's nice for the device manufacturer because they can make something very specific to them. For us app developers, that's a nightmare because it means that every device that's out there that calls itself an Android has a slightly different operating system on it. So we've been looking at that for a long time. There's certain things we need in terms of PDF libraries, that Android doesn't provide such a nice interface. It's one of the things that's always been nice about even your Mac is it has very nice PDF capabilities. They carried that over to the OS when they did the iOS interface. The Android kind of has more of the Windows thing where it doesn't natively handle PDFs very well. And so that's one of the challenges we have. And so we would love to go to Android. We're trying to figure out if we can commercially make that viable, because we have to essentially build a Knit companion for every type of Android device that we want to support. We have to test it for each of those devices, and we probably have to come up with our own PDF libraries for each of those devices.
Wow.
So it's not that we don't want to get there, and it's not that we don't want to support those users. We really do. It's just a lot harder to get there than even it was to get onto the iPad originally. There's just more hurdles and challenges.
Wow. What about the Fire? What about the Kindle system? How are they doing their app development?
So they're doing most of their own app development, and they're looking to get, app developers in. I think it makes a big difference if you're an app developer for a simple app versus a more complicated app, because then you really require less of the operating system. The Kindle and the other book readers who now have some basic Android capabilities, they're excellent book readers, and they do a little bit more than book reading. I think it's a misconception to think of them as a full tablet with a full tablet's capabilities. And I know a lot of people like to think of them that way, and they kind of wish for a couple $100 they could get a fully functional tablet. But even if you look at the Motorola tablets and the Samsung tablets, they're still, $300, $400, $500 to buy those tablets. And there is a difference. There is a difference in hardware. There is a difference in what you're getting when you buy those full tablets. So the Kindle and the Amazon tablets, those are probably even harder for us to support because the hardware isn't there. It's just not quite there. And it'll get there, and I'm pretty sure the Android market will settle itself out. It can't remain this way forever.
Right.
But, we can't get there as fast as we want to get there, and certainly I know from the requests I get, people want us to get there. So,
wow, that's really interesting. I hadn't realized that about the Droid market.
Yeah.
The last two questions were about updates, internal updates. Like, are you planning on adding any renaming or folder organizational capabilities? I've already got something like 30 patterns on my.
Yeah, I know. So yes, for both questions. In fact, so there's two things. You can rename a project in the next release that's coming out, and actually even in the current release, because you can copy a project, give it a new name, and then delete the old project. So that essentially renames the project. What you're talking about, I think, though, is renaming the PDF itself. We do not, I never thought about allowing people to change the names of the PDFs. And you're right, those are, like when you get a pattern from Ravelry, it's QLR762. It's a completely meaningless name. That's an artifact of how Ravelry is serving up the PDF. So,
yeah, it's interesting because I had to go back and look for one, and I wound up with a list of QLs to look through and went,
Yeah, so if you know which project you have associated with that PDF, you can see the name of the PDF there. So that's actually a really interesting idea. We'd have to let people rename it before they create the first project with it, because the name is very critical. It's tied to the project. So if you change the name later, then your project that you created before will be looking for the old names.
Oh.
So that's a great customer enhancement request. And it's not one that's been on the list before. That's a new one. Usually I have heard them before, but that's a new one.
I'll have to tell my little knitting group. They're all unique.
That's right. And then the request for folders and project organization. Yes, we are going to be doing that. It's going to come in conjunction with support for the cloud so that you can sync things to the cloud. And we're coming out with the phone and the iTouch before we have the full cloud syncing between devices. The cloud is coming. It's great. There's a few little things to work out, and we can't have people losing their patterns or being confused about how it works. So we're giving that a few more months to solidify. But when we come out with cloud syncing, we're also going to come out with a lot of different ways to organize your patterns with metadata. So think of it as you could have potentially playlists for your patterns. So you could show me all my lace patterns or show me all my patterns that use this kind of weight yarn. So just like you have playlists, like my favorites for your music, you could have playlists for your patterns as opposed to folders for organization structure.
That's very cool.
That's what we're kind of thinking of because we think people will be pretty used to the playlist concept.
So huge thank you to Sally Holt for talking to me for so long about this. I found the whole concept of designing an app for something like the iPad really fascinating, but also learning that there's a reason why the Droid market is still kind of struggling to catch up. I mean, there's plenty of things to download, but how difficult it must be for the designers to have to design for each different phone type to get that platform right. I don't know. Makes my head hurt. But I also really appreciated listening to Sally and finding out just how much care and attention to us, to the customers, went into the process of building the app. It's one of those things that makes kind of the faceless internet a little bit less faceless and a lot more friendly when you know that when you purchase something, and Knit Companion is not cheap. You get a lot for it, clearly, and you get the added benefit of knowing that when they come up with the upgrade comes to you for free, and the iPhone app is going to be attached to the iPad app. That kind of stuff is great, but it really is the personal contact that I think makes such a difference. And in fact, when my knitting group here told me and showed me, Nanette the Nanny and Mama Bear Knitter, they showed me their iPads and this particular app on it. One of the things that they said was, and if you have any trouble, just email. And that's just great. And it's certainly a lot more friendly than what we find happening in Dracula. Mostly at this early stage, I don't want to give too much away, but there are some terms you need to know and some places that will resonate better for you if you know what they are when you hear them. So, one thing I find interesting in this chapter 20 is there's a whole lot of Shakespeare being dropped here, there, and everywhere. There are quotes that refer to Hamlet, to King Lear, to Malvolio from Twelfth Night is mentioned. Malvolio is kind of an uptight puritanical character who nobody really likes, but who has actually a very interesting part in that play. If you've never seen Twelfth Night before, it's worth seeing a good production of it. The other thing is to know that Chicksand Street, which is spelled exactly how it sounds, Chicksand, Chicksand Street, is where Jack the Ripper perpetrated his murders in the 1888s, that area. And while the address that is listed here is fictional, the location is not. And that kind of carries over into all of these different addresses that you will hear Jonathan Harker talking about. The most important thing to know is that it spans the spectrum from great neighborhoods to really not great neighborhoods, and on both sides of the Thames River, which is also kind of important when we're talking about Dracula. I thought it might be of some academic interest for you that you'll hear Jonathan Harker tip somebody a half-crown. And a half-crown, this is according to the annotations that I've got in my copy of the book, a half-crown was a silver coin worth 2 shillings 6pence, the modern equivalent of over £8, or about $13 or $14 in the United States, which is quite a chunk of change to be paying these guys off with. The other thing, there are a couple things that you might think were anachronistic. I was afraid you would think were anachronistic if I didn't mention them to you. One is there were, in fact, cold storage places in London, especially near the docks. The problems of food preservation started to be solved in 1875 when ice was first used on a large scale. And then in 1879, the Bell-Coleman mechanical dry air refrigerator started to go into production, it used a steam engine to compress air, and it didn't require any chemicals. So by 1888, the machinery at present use, this is a quote, the machinery at present use in 1888 was capable of freezing upwards of 300,000 tons of meat per annum. And it is rapidly being added to, and it may be said that these machines have accomplished a perfect solution of the great problem of fresh meat preservation and distribution. So by 1888, meat was being frozen for shipping and for storing on the docks before it was taken to people's stores and homes. And that's amazing. You know, it really was this incredible age of a birth of a whole lot of technology. There was an interesting quote about Piccadilly. Dracula's choice of Piccadilly for one of his residences may have been motivated in part by the plentiful supply of nourishment. A writer in a book called The Degeneration of Women of the time noted that Piccadilly was familiar to Londoners as the part of the metropolis in which, quote, fallen servant girls and adulterous wives turned away from home eventually and landed in a place where the lechers from the West End came in hopes of picking them up. So, not the nicest part of town to be hanging out at, but certainly lots of food for Dracula. You will hear reference to something called mews, M-E-W-S. These are the little alleyways behind houses that would give you access to a garage or a place to stable your horse. NYU has mews. They're just little streets with little apartments behind the larger houses. In fact, if you saw, what was it? It was Will Smith's zombie movie that they filmed in New York. The house that he is in, that he's barricaded in. What is it? I Am Legend, I think? Was that it? I think that was it. The house that he's barricades himself into, where he had lived with his family, that's on the street that faces Washington Square Park. And if you go behind that house, you reach the NYU mews if you're ever in New York. And they're lovely. They look like they would be charming to live on. But you have to be a professor and probably have been there forever to qualify to get into the mews. You will also hear reference, I thought this was fascinating, to a thing called the Aerated Bread Company. There is a guy who figured out how to make a yeastless bread. Now, this does not sound appetizing, but check this out. He infiltrated the dough with carbonic acid gas generated by sulfuric acid reacting with chalk. He basically is carbonating the dough. It's like, making a fizzy drink. But it cut the preparation time for making a fluffy bread from 8 to 10 hours down to 30 minutes. And so as a consequence, this guy who invented this, Douglas, his process, he could make 400 2-pound loaves in 40 minutes compared to, the extraordinary amount of time that was taken to make bread before this, which meant that cheap bread was available. A woman, a manager of one of his bread stores, said, "Let me start serving tea." And quickly, her tea shops became a meeting place for everybody. And because women were allowed to go to the tea shops where they might have had trouble going to the pubs or the coffee houses or the places where the men were congregating in their kind of men-only things, the ABC shops, these Aerated Bread Company tea shops, are, in some people's minds, credited with helping the emancipation of women, because there was a place to network where you could sit down and have a cup of tea and get some bread and butter and sandwich and whatever. So these ABC shops were all over the place, and there was one at 27 Piccadilly Street. They were eventually bought by Allied Bakeries, which was the predecessor to Associated British Foods. So they're not there anymore, but it was like McDonald's. There were hundreds of these things all over the city, which I thought was kind of cool. You will also hear Renfield at one point make what I think is one of his most fascinating comments. And I'm just going to read it to you. It's coming up. "You might as well ask a man to eat molecules with a pair of chopsticks." Both of these things sound anachronistic to our modern ears, but even though Chinese restaurants really didn't show up in London in any great number until after World War II, the concept of chopsticks was well known even in 1892. In fact, a Chinese collection with an exhibit of all things Chinese opened near Hyde Park Corner in the 1840s. So people knew about chopsticks. they also had compared them to knitting needles. So there is our connection, bringing us back to the craft part of CraftLit. All right, I am going to hand you over to the capable voices of Chapter 20 of Dracula.
Chapter 20. Jonathan Harker's Journal. 1st of October, evening. I found Thomas Snelling in his house at Bethnal Green, but unhappily he was not in a condition to remember anything. The very prospect of beer which my expected coming had opened to him had proved too much, and he had begun too early on his expected debauch. I learned, however, from his wife, who seemed a decent poor soul, that he was only the assistant to Smollett, who, of the two mates, were the responsible person. So I drove to Walworth, and found Mr. Joseph Smollett at home and in his shirt-sleeves, taking a late tea out of a saucer. He's a decent, intelligent fellow, distinctly a good, reliable type of workman, and with a headpiece of his own. He remembered all about the incident of the boxes, and from a wonderful dog's-eared notebook which he produced from some mysterious receptacle about the seat of his trousers, and which he had hieroglyphical entries in thick, half-obliterated pencil, he gave me the destinations of the boxes. There were, he said, 6 in the cartload which he took from Carfax and left at 197 Chicksand Street, Mile End, Newtown, and another 6 which he deposited at Jamaica Lane, Bermondsey. If then the Count meant to scatter these ghastly refuges of his over London, these places were chosen at the first of delivery, so that the later he might distribute more fully. The systematic manner in which this was done made me think that he could not mean to confine himself to 2 sides of London. He was now fixed on the far east of the northern shore, on the east of the southern shore, and on the south. The north and west were surely never meant to be left out of his diabolical scheme, let alone the city itself and the very heart of fashionable London in the south-west and west. I went back to Smollett and asked him if he could tell us if any of the other boxes had been taken from Carfax. He replied, "Well, governor, you've treated me wery handsome." I had given him half a sovereign. "And I'll tell you all I know. I heard a man by the name of Bloxham say 4 nights ago in the Hare and Hounds in Pincher's Alley as how he and his mate had a dusty job in an old house in Purfleet. There ain't a many such jobs as this here, and I'm thinking that maybe Sam Bloxham could tell you summat." I asked if he could tell me where to find him. I told him that if he could get me the address, it would be worth another half-sovereign to him. So he gulped down the rest of his tea and stood up, saying that he was going to begin the search then and there. At the door he stopped and said, "Look here, governor, there ain't no sense in me keeping you here. I may find Sam soon, or I mayn't. But anyhow, he ain't like to be in a way to tell you much tonight. Sam's a rare one when he starts on the booze. If you can give me an envelope with a stamp on it and put your address on it, I'll find out where Sam is to be found and post it to you tonight. But you'd better be up ordering soon in the morning, or maybe you won't catch him. For Sam gets off main early, never mind the booze the night before." This was all practical, so one of the children went off with a penny to buy an envelope and a sheet of paper, and to keep the change. When she came back, I addressed the envelope and stamped it, and when Smollett had again faithfully promised to post the address when found, I took my way to home. We're on the track anyhow. I am tired tonight and want sleep. Mina is fast asleep and looks a little too pale. Her eyes look as though she had been crying. Poor dear, I've no doubt it frets her to be kept in the dark, and it may make her doubly anxious about me and the others. But it is best as it is. It is better to be disappointed and worried in such a way now than to have her nerve broken. The doctors were quite right to insist on her being kept out of this dreadful business. I must be firm, for on me this particular burden of silence must rest. I shall not ever enter on the subject with her under any circumstances. Indeed, it may not be a hard task after all, for she herself has become reticent on the subject, and has not spoken of the Count or his doings ever since we told her of our decision. 2nd of October, evening. A long and trying and exciting day. By the first post I got my directed envelope with a dirty scrap of paper enclosed, on which was written with a carpenter's pencil in a sprawling hand, "Sam Bloxham, Corcoran's, 4 Potter's Court, Bartle Street, Walworth. Ask for the depite. I got the letter in bed and rose without waking Mina. She looked heavy and sleepy and pale and far from well. I determined not to wake her, but that when I should return from this new search, I would arrange for her going back to Exeter. I think she would be happier in our own home, with her daily tasks to interest her, than in being here amongst us and in ignorance. I only saw Dr. Seward for a moment and told him where I was off to, promising to come back and tell the rest so soon as I should have found anything. I drove to Walworth and found, with some difficulty, Potter's Court. Mr. Smollett's spelling misled me, as I asked for Potter's Court instead of Potter's Court. However, when I had found the court, I had no difficulty in discovering Corcoran's lodging-house. When I asked the man who came to the door for the depite, he shook his head and said, "I don't know him. There ain't no such person here, and never heard of him in all me blooming days. Don't believe there's anyone of that kind living here or anywheres." I took out Smollett's letter, and as I read it, it seemed to me that the lesson of the spelling of the name of the court might guide me. "What are you?" I asked. "I'm the deputy," he answered. I saw at once that I was on the right track. Phonetic spelling had again misled me. A half-crown tip put the deputy's knowledge at my disposal, and I learned that Mr. Bloxham, who had slept off the remains of his beer on the previous night at Corcoran's, had left for his work at Poplar at 5 o'clock that morning. He could not tell me where the place of work was situated, but he had a vague idea that it was some kind of new-fangled warehouse, and with this slender clue I had to start for Poplar. It was 12 o'clock before I got any satisfactory hint of such a building, and this I got at a coffee shop where some workmen were having their dinner. One of these suggested that there was being erected at Cross Angel Street a new cold storage building. As this suited the condition of new-fangled warehouse, I at once drove to it. An interview with a surly gatekeeper and a surlier foreman, both of whom were appeased with coin of the realm, put me on the track of Bloxham. He was sent for on my suggesting that I was willing to pay his day's wages to his foreman on the privilege of asking him a few questions on a private matter. He was a smart enough fellow, though rough of speech and bearing. When I had promised to pay for his information and give him an earnest, he told me that he had made 2 journeys between Carfax and a house in Piccadilly, and that he had taken from his house to be the latter 9 great boxes, main heavy ones, with a horse and cart hired by him for the purpose. I asked him if he could tell me the number of the house in Piccadilly, to which he replied, "Well, governor, I forgets the number, but it was only a few doors down from the big white church of summat of the kind, not long built. It was a dusty old house too, though nothing of the dustiness of the house we took the blooming boxes from." "How did you get into the houses if they were both empty?" "There was an old party what engaged me a-waiting at the house at Purfleet. He helped me to lift the boxes and put them in the dray. Curse me, but he was the strongest chap I ever struck, and him an old fellow with a white moustache. One that thin you would think he wouldn't throw a shadder." How this phrase thrilled through me. Why, he took up his end of the boxes like they were pounds at sea, and me a huffing and a blowing before I could upend mine anyhow. And I'm no chicken neither. "How did you get into the house in Piccadilly?" I asked. "He was there too. He must have started off and got there before me, for when I rang at the bell he came and opened the door himself, and he helped me to carry the boxes into the hall." "The whole 9, I asked. "Yes. There were 5 in first load and 4 in second. It were main dry work, and I don't so well remember how I got home." I interrupted him. "Were the boxes left in the hall?" "Yeah. It was a big hall, and there were nothing else in it." I made one more attempt to further matters. "You didn't have any key?" "Never used no key, no nothing. The old gent, he opened the door himself and shut it again when I drove off. I don't remember the last time, but there was the beer." "And you can't remember the number of the house?" "No, sir. But you needn't have no difficulty about that. It's a high 'un with a stone front and a bow on it, and I steps up to the door. I know them steps, having had to carry the boxes with 3 loafers what come round to earn a copper. The old gent gives them shillings, and they sees they got so much, they wants more. but he took one of them by the shoulder and was like to throw him down the steps till the lot of them went away casting. I thought that with this description I could find the house, so, having paid my friend for his information, I started off for Piccadilly. I had gained a new painful experience. The Count could, it was evident, handle the earth boxes himself. If so, time was precious, for now he had achieved a certain amount of distribution, he could, by choosing his own time, complete the task unobserved. At Piccadilly Circus I discharged my cab and walked westward. Beyond the Junior Constitutional I came across the house described, and was satisfied that this was one of the next of the lairs arranged by Dracula. The house looked as though it had been long untenanted. The windows were encrusted with dust, and the shutters were up. All the framework was black with time, and from the iron the paint had mostly scaled away. It was evident that up to lately there had been a large notice board in front of the balcony. It had, however, been roughly torn away, the uprights which had supported it still remaining. Behind the rails of the balcony I saw there were some loose boards, whose raw edges looked white. I could have given a good deal to have been able to see the notice board intact, as it would, perhaps, have given some clue to the ownership of the house. I remembered my experience of the investigation and purchase of Carfax, and I could not but feel that if I could find the former owner there might be some means of gaining access to the house. There was at present nothing to be learned from the Piccadilly side, and nothing could be done, so I went round to the back to see if anything could be gathered from this quarter. The mews were active, the Piccadilly houses being mostly in occupation. I asked one or two of the grooms and helpers who I saw round if they could tell me anything about the empty houses. One of them said he had heard it had lately been taken, but he couldn't say from whom. He told me, however, that up to very lately there had been a notice board of "For Sale" up, and that perhaps Mitchell, Sons and Candy, the house agents, could tell me something, as he thought he remembered seeing the name of that firm on the board. I did not wish to seem too eager or let my informant know or guess too much, so, thanking him in the usual manner, I strolled away. It was now growing dusk, and the autumn night was closing in, so I did not lose any time. Having learned the address of Mitchell, Sons and Candy from a directory at the Berkeley, I was soon at their office in Sackville Street. The gentleman who saw me was particularly suave in manner, but uncommunicative in equal proportion. Having once told me that the Piccadilly house, which throughout our interview he called a mansion, was sold, he considered my business as concluded. When I asked who had purchased it, he opened his eyes a thought wider, and paused a few seconds before replying, "It is sold, sir." "Pardon me," I said, with equal politeness, "but I have special reason for wishing to know who purchased it." Again he paused longer and raised his eyebrows still more. "It is sold, sir," was again his laconic reply. "Surely you do not mind letting me know so much?" "But I do mind," he answered. "The affairs of their clients are absolutely safe in the hands of Mitchell, Sons and Candy." This was manifestly a prig of the first water, and there was no use arguing with him. I thought I had best meet him on his own ground, and said, "Your clients, sir, are happy in having so resolute a guardian of their confidence. I am myself a professional man." Here I handed my card. "In this instance I am not prompted by curiosity. I act on the part of Lord Godalming, who wishes to know something of the property which was, he understood, lately for sale." These words put a different complexion on matters. "I would like to oblige you if I could, Mr. Harker, and especially would I like to oblige his lordship. We once carried out a small manner of renting some chambers for him when he was the Honourable Arthur Holmwood. If you would let me have his lordship's address, I would consult the house on the subject, and will, in any case, communicate with his lordship by tonight's post. It would be a pleasure if we can so far deviate from our rules as to give the required information to his lordship." I wanted to secure a friend and not make an enemy, so I thanked him, gave the address at Dr. Seward's, and came away. It was now dark, and I was tired and hungry. I got a cup of tea at the Aerated Bread Company and came down to Purfleet by the next train. I found all the others at home. Mina was looking tired and pale, but she made a gallant effort to be bright and cheerful. It wrung my heart to think that I had to keep anything from her and so cause her disquietude. Thank God this will be the last night of her looking on at our conferences, and feeling the sting of our not showing our confidence. It took all my courage to hold the wise resolution of keeping her out of our grim task. She seems somehow more reconciled, or else the very subject seems to have become repugnant to her, for when any accidental allusion is made she actually shudders. I am glad we made our resolution in time, as with such feelings as this our growing knowledge would be torture to her. I could not tell the others of the day's discovery till we were alone, so, after dinner, followed by a little music to save appearances even amongst ourselves, I took Mina to her room and left her to go to bed. The dear girl was more affectionate with me than ever, and clung to me as though she would detain me, but there was much to be talked of, and I came away. Thank God, the ceasing of telling things had made no difference between us. When I came down again, I found the others all gathered round the fire in the study. In the train I had written my diary so far, and simply read it off to them as best means of letting them get abreast of my own information. When I had finished, Van Helsing said, "This has been a good day's work, friend Jonathan. Doubtless we are on the track of the missing boxes. If we find them all in that house, then our work is near the end. But if there be some missing, we must search until we find them. Then we shall make our final coup and hunt the wretch to his real death." We all sat silent a while, and all at once Mr. Morris spoke. "Say, how are we going to get into that house?" "We got into the other," answered Lord Godalming quickly. "But Art, this is different. We broke house at Carfax, but we had night and a walled park to protect us. It'd be a mighty different thing to commit burglary in Piccadilly either by day or night. I confess I don't see how we're going to get in unless that agency duck can find us a key of some sort. Perhaps we shall know when you get his letter in the morning." Lord Godalming's brows contracted, and he stood up and walked about the room. By and by he stopped and said, turning from one to another of us, "Quincy's head is level. This burglary business is getting serious. We got off once all right, but we now have a rare job on hand, unless we can find the Count's key basket." As nothing could well be done before morning, and as it would be at least advisable to wait till Lord Godalming should hear from Mitchell's, we decided not to take any active step before breakfast time. For a good while we sat and smoked, discussing the matter in its various bearings. I took the opportunity of bringing this diary right up to the moment, and I am very sleepy and shall go to bed. Just a line. Mina sleeps soundly and her breathing is regular. Her forehead is puckered up into little wrinkles as though she thinks even in her sleep. She is still too pale, but does not look so haggard as she did this morning. Tomorrow will, I hope, mend all this. She will be herself at home in Exeter. Oh, but I am sleepy.
Dr. Seward's Diary, 1 October. I am puzzled afresh about Renfield. His moods change so rapidly that I find it difficult to keep touch of them, and as they always mean something more than his own well-being, they form a more interesting study. This morning, when I went to see him after his repulse of Van Helsing, his manner was that of a man commanding destiny. He was, in fact, commanding destiny subjectively. He did not really care for any of the things of mere earth. He was in the clouds and looked down on all the weaknesses and wants of us poor mortals. I thought I would improve the occasion and learn something, so I asked him, "What about the flies these times?" He smiled on me in quite a superior sort of way, such a smile as would have become the face of Malvolio, as he answered me, "The fly, my dear sir, has one striking feature. Its wings are typical of the aerial powers of the physic faculties. The ancients did well when they typified the soul as a butterfly." I thought I would push his analogy to its utmost logically, so I said quickly, "Oh, it is a soul you are after now, is it?" His madness foiled his reason, and a puzzled look spread over his face as, shaking his head with a decision which I had but seldom seen in him, he said, oh no, I want no souls. Life is all I want." Here he brightened up. "I am pretty indifferent about it at present. Life is all right. I have all I want. You must get a new patient, Doctor, if you wish to study zoophagy. This puzzled me a little, so I drew him on. Then you command life. You are a god, I suppose. He smiled with an ineffably benign superiority. Oh, no. Far be it from me to arrogate to myself the attributes of the deity. I am not even concerned in his especially spiritual doings. If I may state my intellectual position, I am, so far as concerns things purely terrestrial, somewhat in the position which Enoch occupied spiritually. This was a poser to me. I could not at the moment recall Enoch's appositeness, so I had to ask a simple question, though I felt that by doing so I was lowering myself in the eyes of the lunatic. And why with Enoch? Because he walked with God. I could not see the analogy, but did not like to admit it, so I hearkened back to what he had denied. So you don't care about life and you don't want souls. Why not? I put my question quickly and somewhat sternly on purpose to disconcert him. The effort succeeded. For an instant, he consciously relapsed into the old servile manner, bent low before me, and actually fawned upon me as he replied, I don't want any souls, indeed, I don't. I couldn't use them if I had them. They would be no manner of use to me. I couldn't eat them, or... He suddenly stopped, and the old cunning look spread over his face like a wind swept on the surface of the water. And, Doctor, as to life, what is it after all? When you've got all you require, and you know that you will never want, that is all. I have friends, good friends like you, Dr. Seward. This was said with a leer of inexpressible cunning. I know that I shall never lack the means of life. I think that through the cloudiness of his insanity, he saw some antagonism in me, for he at once fell back on the last refuge of such as he, a dogged silence. After a short time, I saw that for the present it was useless to speak to him. He was sulky, and so I came away. Later in the day he sent for me. Ordinarily I would not have come without special reason, but just at present I am so interested in him that I would gladly make an effort. Besides, I am glad to have anything to help pass the time. Harker is out, following up with clues, and so are Lord Godalming and Quincy. Van Helsing sits in my study poring over the record prepared by the Harkers. He seems to think that by accurate knowledge of all details he will light upon some clue. He does not wish to be disturbed in the work without cause. I would have taken him with me to see the patient, only I thought that after his last repulse he might not care to go again. There was also another reason. Renfield might not speak so freely before a third person as when he and I were alone. I found him sitting in the middle of the floor on his stool, a pose which is generally indicative of some mental energy on his part. When I came in, he said at once, as though the question had been waiting on his lips, "What about souls?" It was evident that my surmise had been correct. Unconscious cerebration was doing its work even with the lunatic. I determined to have the matter out. "What about them yourself?" I asked. He did not reply for a moment, but looked all around him and up and down as though he expected to find some inspiration for an answer. "I don't want any souls," he said in a feeble, apologetic way. The matter seemed to be preying on his mind, and so I determined to use it to be cruel only to be kind. So I said, "You like life and you want life?" "Oh, yes, that is all right. You needn't worry about that." "But," I asked, "how are we to get the life without getting the souls also?" This seemed to puzzle him, so I followed it up. "A nice time you'll have sometime when you're flying out there, with the souls of thousands of flies and spiders and birds and cats buzzing and twittering and moaning all around you. You've got their lives, you know, and you must put up with their souls." Something seemed to affect his imagination, for he put his fingers to his ears and shut his eyes, screwing them up tightly just as a small boy does when his face is being soaped. There was something pathetic in it that touched me. It also gave me a lesson, for it seemed that before me was a child, only a child, though the features were worn and the stubble on the jaw was white. It was evident that he was undergoing some process of mental disturbance, and knowing how his past moods had interpreted things seemingly foreign to himself, I thought I would enter into his mind as well as I could and go with him. The first step was to restore confidence, so I asked him, speaking pretty loudly so that he could hear me through his closed ears, "Would you like some sugar to get your flies around again?" He seemed to wake up all at once and shook his head. With a laugh he replied, "Not much. Flies are poor things, after all." After a pause he added, "But I don't want their souls buzzing round me all the same." "Or spiders," I went on. "Blow spiders. What's the use of spiders? There isn't anything in them to eat or—" He stopped suddenly, as though reminded of a forbidden topic. So, I thought to myself, this is the second time he has suddenly stopped at the word drink. What does it mean? Renfield seemed himself aware of having made a lapse, for he hurried on as though to distract my attention from it. "I don't take any stock at all in such matters. Rats and mice and such small deer as Shakespeare has it. Chicken feed of the larder, they might be called. I'm past all that sort of nonsense. You might as well ask a man to eat molecules with a pair of chopsticks as to try to interest me about the less carnivora when I know of what is before me." "I see," I said. "You want big things that you can make your teeth meet in. How would you like to breakfast on an elephant?" "What ridiculous nonsense you are talking." He was getting too wide awake, so I thought I would press him hard. "I wonder," I said reflectively, "what an elephant's soul is like." The effect I desired was obtained, for he at once fell from his high horse and became a child again. "I don't want an elephant's soul or any soul at all," he said. For a few moments he sat despondently. He suddenly jumped to his feet with his eyes blazing and all the signs of intense cerebral excitement. "To hell with you and your souls," he shouted. "Why do you plague me about souls? Haven't I got enough to worry and pain to distract me already without thinking of souls?" He looked so hostile that I thought he was in for another homicidal fit, so I blew my whistle. The instant, however, that I did so, he became calm and said apologetically, "Forgive me, Doctor. I forgot myself. You do not need any help. I am so worried in my mind that I am apt to be irritable. If you only knew the problem I have to face, and that I am working out, you would pity and tolerate and pardon me. Pray do not put me in a strait waistcoat. I want to think, and I cannot think freely when my body is confined. I am sure you will understand." He had evidently self-control, and so when the attendants came, I told them not to mind, and they withdrew. Renfield watched them go. When the door was closed, he said with considerable dignity and sweetness, "Dr. Seward, you have been very considerate towards me. Believe me that I am very, very grateful to you." I thought it well to leave him in this mood, and so I came away. There is certainly something to ponder over this man's state. Several points seem to make what the American interviewer calls a story, if one could only get them in proper order. Here they are. Will not mention drinking. Fears the thought of being burdened with the souls of anything. Has no dread of wanting life in the future. Despises the mere forms of life altogether, though he dreads being haunted by their souls. Logically, all these things point one way. He has assurance of some kind that he will acquire some higher life. He dreads the consequence, the burden of a soul. Then it is a human life he looks to. And the assurance, merciful God, the Count has been to him, and there is some new scheme of terror afoot. Later, I went after my round to Van Helsing and told him my suspicion. He grew very grave, and after thinking the matter over for a while, asked me to take him to Renfield. I did so. As we came to the door, we heard the lunatic within singing gaily as he used to do in the time which now seems so long ago. When we entered, we saw with amazement that he had spread out his sugar as of old. The flies, lethargic with the autumn, were beginning to buzz into the room. We tried to make him talk of the subject of our previous conversation, but he would not attend. He went on with his singing just as though we had not been present. He had got a scrap of paper and was folding it into a notebook. We had to come away as ignorant as we went in. His is a curious case indeed. We must watch him tonight.
I know. It's incredibly frustrating. Between the Mina and the Seward just catching on, it's crazy making. But, next week, wow, do I have a mind-blowing chapter for you next week. So, you're going to have to wait. Sorry. No, not really. The only other thing I wanted to tell you about was that for February, so anytime between now and the end of February, we have a new incentive. We have a listener, Heidi, in California, who makes the most amazing caramels. She will make you a pound of caramel to send to you. So if you donate to CraftLit during the month of what's left of January and February 2012, you will be put into the drawing for a pound of glorious caramely goodness from Heidi. Very excited about that. And that's it. I hope you have a great week. I hope I have a great week too, and I will speak to you. I will look forward to speaking to you very soon on the subject of the next chapter of Dracula. Please remember to support the people who support CraftLit. Visit Knit Circus online magazine, offering 3 rings of knitting, sewing, and fun. You can check out the latest issue at www.knitcircus.com. And what would Madame Defarge knit? A new book of knit and crochet patterns coming to you from the CraftLit family. And please visit the blogs and sites of CraftLit supporters. Those links can be found in the sidebar of the show notes. The show notes can be found at craftlit.com. CraftLit can also be accessed by its own Android and iPhone application. You can purchase it at the iPhone or iTouch application store, or you can subscribe free at iTunes. CraftLit is made possible by the generous support of its listeners, and for that, I am truly grateful. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on.